The 1960s were a massive decade for science fiction. This is the era that gave us movies like 2001, A Space Odyssey, Planet of the Apes, and The Time Machine. Those are the ones everybody remembers, the ones that still get talked about, referenced, and replayed. But here's what usually gets forgotten. While those movies were filling theaters and shaping what sci-fi was supposed to be, a lot of other science fiction films were coming out at the exact same time. Movies that were darker, movies that were quieter, movies that didn't have a big monster, a clean hero, or a simple ending. And because they didn't look or feel like the sci-fi people expected in the 60s, they just disappeared, not because they were bad, not because they were cheap, but because they didn't fit the moment. Today, most people recognize the titles. Some even remember the posters, but almost nobody actually remembers the movies. So in this video, we're going back to the 1960s to look at 9 science fiction films most people missed, movies that were overshadowed by the big names, but are still worth watching today. Let's start with number 9, The Creation of the Humanoids. This is one of those titles that sounds familiar even if you've never actually seen the movie. The Creation of the Humanoids came out in 1962, right when sci-fi audiences were used to monsters, invasions, and very clear good versus evil stories.
What is it, dear? Darling, you're leaving me out of something.
Instead, this movie does almost the opposite. It's set in a post-apocalyptic future where humans live alongside humanoid robots that are almost impossible to tell apart from real people. There's no big disaster happening on screen, no rampaging creatures, no laser battles. Most of the movie is people talking and arguing about whether these humanoids are just machines or something closer to human.
I have analyzed the subject robot as thoroughly as time permitted. He is a basic R-34 type, but certain alterations have elevated him to a mid-90 classification.
That was the problem. Audiences in the early 60s weren't really going to sci-fi movies to watch philosophical debates about artificial intelligence and civil rights. They wanted spectacle. This movie gave them questions instead. One of the most interesting things about the creation of the humanoids is that it treats robots seriously. The humanoids aren't evil. They're calm, polite, and rational, which actually makes them more unsettling. The fear in the movie doesn't come from what the robots do, but from how humans react to them, and that idea was way ahead of its time. Movies wouldn't really start digging into that kind of what makes someone human question again until decades later. In 1962, it mostly confused people. Critics found it stiff, audiences found it slow, and it quietly faded away. Today, it plays like an early draft of ideas we now see everywhere in science fiction. But back then, it didn't feel like sci-fi people recognized, so it slipped through the cracks. The Earth Dies Screaming. This one looks like it should be a standard 1960s alien invasion movie. The title sounds dramatic. The poster promises chaos, and it came out right in the middle of the decade when invasion movies were everywhere. But The Earth Dies Screaming is way stranger and way quieter than people expected. The movie opens after something has already gone terribly wrong. People are just dead. Lying in cars, slumped in streets, frozen mid-action, no explanation, no warning. The film never gives you a big moment where the invasion starts, you're dropped into the aftermath. That alone threw audiences off. Instead of explosions and panic, most of the movie is about a small group of survivors hiding out, trying to figure out what's hunting them. And what's hunting them isn't flashy. The robots that patrol the streets barely move, barely react, and barely emote. They just exist, watching. That slow, empty feeling is the whole point of the movie. But in 1964, that wasn't what people were going to sci-fi films for. Viewers expected action. This gave them silence. Viewers expected answers. This gave them atmosphere. Even the alien invasion itself stays vague. You're never really told who the invaders are or why they're there. The movie seems more interested in paranoia than explanation, which makes it feel unsettling and unsatisfying if you're waiting for a big reveal. Because of that, The Earth Dies Screaming never really found an audience. It wasn't exciting enough to become a hit, and it wasn't weird enough to become infamous. It just quietly faded out. Today, it feels like an early version of the kind of minimalist, dread-filled sci-fi that would show up decades later. But in the mid-60s, it was simply out of step with what audiences wanted.
For God's sake, say hello to me. What are you sore about? Oh, Mac, you can't act this way.
Robinson Crusoe on Mars. This is one of those movies where people hear the title and immediately go, wait, I think I've heard of that. And yeah, you probably have. Robinson Crusoe on Mars came out in 1964, right in the middle of the space race hype. Audiences were used to rockets, astronauts, and big futuristic visions of space. What they got here was mostly one guy stuck alone on Mars, trying not to die. The setup is simple. An astronaut is stranded on Mars after a mission goes wrong. There's no quick rescue coming, no grand space battles, just survival, figuring out how to breathe, how to find water, and how to stay sane. That already made it a hard sell. What really didn't help is that the movie moves at a slow, deliberate pace. A lot of time is spent watching the main character struggle with isolation, long stretches where nothing exciting happens. It's closer to a survival drama than the sci-fi adventures people expected in the mid-60s. One of the strangest and most memorable choices is giving him a companion, a monkey in a tiny spacesuit. It sounds ridiculous, and honestly, it kind of is, but it also underlines how lonely the movie is. That monkey becomes his only connection to another living being. Despite how quiet it is, the movie was actually taken pretty seriously. The production design was solid for the time, and the filmmakers tried to ground the science as much as they could with what was known about Mars in the early 60s. This wasn't meant to be campy, but that seriousness worked against it. Audiences expecting spectacle found it dull. Audiences expecting escapism found it bleak. So Robinson Crusoe on Mars never really clicked with the mainstream. Over time, it developed a reputation as a forgotten oddity, the kind of movie people vaguely remember existing but rarely sit down to watch. Which is a shame because it quietly laid groundwork for later sci-fi survival stories that would become hugely popular decades later.
The year is 2071. But our world is dying.
The Time Travelers. This is one of those movies that looks like it should have been bigger than it was. The Time Travelers came out in 1964 at a point when time travel was already a familiar sci-fi idea. Audiences knew the concept, they understood the rules, so expectations were pretty clear going in. The movie starts with a group of scientists who accidentally open a window into the future, and what they see isn't sleek or optimistic. It's a ruined world filled with mutated humans and strange underground societies. That tonal shift mattered. Instead of treating the future like a place of wonder, this movie treats it like a warning. The future is broken, civilization didn't evolve, it collapsed. And the people who survived aren't heroic or advanced, they're desperate. One interesting detail is how low-key the movie is about all of this. The future isn't introduced with big effects or dramatic reveals. It's just there, ugly, uncomfortable, and clearly shaped by nuclear fear, which was sitting heavy in the early 60s. That realism worked against it. Audiences who wanted excitement found it slow. Audiences who wanted escapism didn't love being reminded where the world might actually be headed. And because the movie doesn't have a strong emotional hook or a big visual gimmick, it struggled to stand out. It wasn't flashy enough to become a hit, it wasn't weird enough to become infamous, so it landed in that worst possible middle ground, remembered by title, forgotten by content. Today, The Time Travelers feels like a snapshot of Cold War anxiety wrapped in a sci-fi shell. Back then, it was just another movie that didn't give people what they expected when they bought the ticket.
Well, how are we going to explain this? The Kremlin. They'll never believe it.
First Men in the Moon. This one came out at a really awkward time. First Men in the Moon was released in 1964, just a few years before the real moon landing, when space was starting to feel less like fantasy and more like something that was actually about to happen. Instead of trying to predict the future, the movie does something kind of clever. It pretends humans already went to the moon, back in 1899. The story is framed around modern astronauts discovering evidence that a Victorian-era expedition reached the moon first, which sends the movie flashing back to that original secret mission. And once they get there, it's not an empty surface. It's an underground world filled with strange insect-like creatures. That's where Ray Harryhausen comes in. The movie is packed with his stop-motion monsters, and honestly, that's the main reason most people remember it at all. If you like Harryhausen's work, this one delivers exactly what you want. The problem is that audiences didn't really know what to do with it. It wasn't sleek or modern, like newer sci-fi was becoming. It wasn't serious science either. And compared to George Pal's The Time Machine, which gets all the attention, this one felt more playful and old-fashioned. It didn't help that once Apollo actually happened, the idea of a secret 1800s moon mission immediately felt silly instead of imaginative. So the movie never became a hit, but it didn't disappear completely either. Over time, it picked up a cult following, mostly because of Harryhausen's creatures and the sheer novelty of the concept. Today, First Men in the Moon feels like one of the last gasps of classic adventure-style sci-fi, released right before the genre shifted into something more serious and grounded.
Mr. Wilson, but if I may say so, the question of death selection may be the most important decision in your life.
Seconds. This is where 1960s sci-fi quietly gets uncomfortable. Seconds came out in 1966 starring Rock Hudson, and that alone already messes with expectations. Hudson was known for playing clean-cut, dependable leading men, romantic roles, safe roles. This movie throws all of that in the trash. Hudson plays a middle-aged man who's deeply unhappy with his life. He's successful, married, financially secure, and completely empty. One day, he's contacted by a mysterious company that offers him something insane, a brand new body, a brand new identity, and a fresh start, and they're serious about it. They fake his death, surgically transform him into a younger man, and drop him into a new life with a new face, which is now Rock Hudson. On paper, this sounds like a dream. In reality, it turns into a slow psychological nightmare. The movie isn't flashy. There are no aliens, no spaceships, no lasers, just paranoia, surveillance, and the creeping realization that changing your life doesn't automatically fix what's broken inside you, what really hurt. Seconds at the time is how bleak it is. Audiences didn't expect this kind of existential dread from a science fiction movie, especially one starring Rock Hudson. Critics were harsh. Some outright hated it. The movie bombed at the box office and basically vanished. But over time, its reputation flipped. Today, Seconds is seen as one of the most disturbing sci-fi films of the decade, not because of effects, but because of how close it hits to real human fears, aging, regret, the idea that reinvention might be another trap instead of an escape. It didn't fit what people wanted from sci-fi in the 60s. That's exactly why it works now.
The 21st century shall be the one that has legalized violence. Rule number 1.
The 10th Victim. At first glance, the 10th Victim looks playful, almost ridiculous, bright pop art colors, stylized futuristic apartments, Marcello Mastroianni dressed like a fashion model, Ursula Andress wearing outfits that feel closer to a magazine spread than a sci-fi costume. That's deliberate. Set in a future where governments have replaced war with a controlled alternative, the movie introduces The Big Hunt, a legalized game where citizens take turns hunting each other. Each participant must kill 10 assigned targets, survive long enough, and you become rich, famous, and untouchable. Mastroianni plays a seasoned hunter who knows the system inside and out. Ursula Andress is assigned as his next target. What makes the situation dangerous isn't just the rules, it's that both of them understand how the game works. They know the public is watching, they know spectacle matters, and they know hesitation gets you killed. The film's smartest move is turning violence into entertainment inside the story. The hunts are sponsored. Assassinations are staged like commercials. Cameras are everywhere. Killing isn't just allowed, it's rewarded with applause, ratings, and brand deals. This wasn't subtle in 1965. The movie is openly mocking how easily morality collapses once violence becomes normalized and profitable. There's no grand villain running the system. People volunteer. They sign up. They smile for the cameras. That's the point. At the time, audiences didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't a straight thriller, it wasn't a comedy either. Its tone was too sharp, too self-aware, and too cynical for mid-60s sci-fi, which still leaned toward adventure and optimism. But in hindsight, The 10th Victim feels disturbingly early. Long before The Running Man, Battle Royale, or The Hunger Games, this movie was already spelling it out. Once violence is packaged as entertainment, people stop asking questions and they start rooting for outcomes. It never became a massive hit, but its ideas aged far better than its box office numbers. Barbarella. Most people think they know Barbarella. They remember the posters, Jane Fonda in the costume, the reputation, the assumption that it's just a silly, over-sexualized space movie from the late 60s. That reputation misses what the movie actually is. Released in 1968, Barbarella is set in a future where Earth claims to have evolved past violence, war, and even sex. Conflict has been solved. Emotions are regulated. Desire is treated like a technical problem. When trouble arises elsewhere in the galaxy, Barbarella is sent to deal with it, not because she's a soldier, but because she represents this civilized future. Once she leaves Earth, that idea falls apart fast. Barbarella keeps running into societies that still use power, fear, manipulation, and control. Violence hasn't disappeared. It's just been rebranded. And the further she travels, the clearer it becomes that Earth's supposed progress might just be denial. What surprises people today is how restrained the movie actually is. Yes, there's nudity. Yes, there's sexuality. But almost all of it is played with a strange innocence. The famous scenes happen off camera or are stylized into set pieces. What the movie is really obsessed with isn't sex, it's how systems pretend to be enlightened while quietly staying cruel. At the time, that confused audiences. Some expected pure exploitation, others expected serious science fiction. Barbarella sat awkwardly between the two. Too weird to be dismissed and too playful to be taken seriously. It wasn't a box office disaster, but it also wasn't embraced as anything important. Decades later, that's changed. Its visual design influenced everything from music videos to fashion, to later sci-fi aesthetics. Its ideas about false progress, sanitized control, and pleasure used as distraction feel sharper now than they did in 1968. People still laugh at Barbarella, but they usually stop laughing halfway through.
For all I know, it could stand for the consolidated mobilization of delinquent females.
Combined miniature deterrent forces.
Say that again.
Fantastic Voyage. This is the one everyone remembers, even if they haven't actually watched it in years. Released in 1966, Fantastic Voyage takes a premise that still sounds insane today. A group of scientists are shrunk down to microscopic size and injected into a human body to save his life from the inside. They have a limited amount of time before the miniaturization wears off, and if they don't get out in time, they die. That's the whole hook, and it works immediately. What made Fantastic Voyage stand out wasn't just the idea, it was the execution. The human body became a full science fiction landscape. Bloodstreams turned into highways, organs became environments. Every scene leaned into the scale of the concept in a way audiences hadn't seen before. At the time, this wasn't just creative, it was a technical flex. The movie won Academy Awards for its visual effects and art direction, and it deserved them. Almost every movie or TV show that later sent characters inside the human body is borrowing directly from this film, whether they admit it or not. What people forget is that Fantastic Voyage wasn't just a gimmick. It mixed Cold War paranoia, espionage, and science fiction into one clean package. There's sabotage, there's mistrust among the crew, there's the constant pressure of the clock. Underneath the spectacle, it's still a tight thriller. Isaac Asimov even wrote the novelization, and he famously didn't love parts of the science. But that didn't matter. The movie wasn't trying to predict the future. It was trying to show audiences something they had never seen before, and it did. That's why Fantastic Voyage belongs here at number 1, not because it's forgotten, but because it became so influential that people stopped thinking of it as a 1960s movie at all. It didn't just represent the decade, it changed what science fiction could look like on screen.